So, you know, this thing about Chrystia Freeland and the guy coming up to her and saying ugly things to her at the elevator. You know, this is completely irrelevant. It's a non-story. It's no big deal. It's completely meaningless. This sort of thing happens all the time. It always has happened. Somebody sees some politician they don't like, and they go up and they say, I hate you, you bastard. And right, nothing new about this at all. So the only difference now is that there are phones everywhere with cameras in them, and people film it and put it on the internet, and this allows lazy journalists to turn these non-events into major moral outrages and to spin a narrative about it. And this is the end of civil society and a threat to democracy. And of course, all the partisans use this, and the partisans in the media, to point at the other guy and say, this is your fault. This is what you get when you listen to people like Pierre Poilievre and all that partisanship and all the rest of it. It's all absolute nonsense. And, you know, I can recall a few years ago, when Trump was in power, and there were all kinds of videos of people going up to members of his government and screaming at them in restaurants and on the street. You know, the Democrat politicians were actually encouraging people to do that, telling them to do it. Maxine Waters was telling people to go out and get in people's faces and confront them, and don't let them feel comfortable out there in the world and all of this.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome. The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C.
So none of this is new. There's nothing unique or shocking or remarkable about this at all. And, you know, the clearest example of the hypocrisy of all of this is when you look at last year during the last federal election campaign in Canada. And you had two incidents that occurred on the same week. And you had one was Justin Trudeau getting on his tour bus following an appearance somewhere. And there was a lot of protesters around. They were very noisy, and some dummy picked up a handful of pebbles and kind of lobbed them in his general direction. And this was picked up by the mainstream media and turned into a major issue and a sign of the decline of civil society in Canada. And, you know, we can't be having politicians treated this way. And you know, the partisans all got involved, the partisans in the media, and this was those terrible anti-vaxxer types. This is what they're like, and conservatives and populism and all this kind of thing.
Last night, speaking to our colleagues on Power and Politics, Evan Balgord, who is the executive director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said that in his opinion, what we're seeing happening here is something that is more organic and more grassroots. Take a listen.
There isn't like one big organization that's organizing this stuff, nor is there any big money behind them. We know that there are groups of people who kind of share conspiratorial beliefs around COVID, including many of them who are part of Canada's racist right, which is kind of entirely embedded within that movement now. And they're kind of following the Prime Minister on his tour around the country.
So is this all about COVID? Well, you saw in some of those pictures signs and T-shirts for the People's Party of Canada. Now, Justin Trudeau yesterday was adamant he would not back down. He said this sort of thing just makes he and his supporters, his campaign's candidates, more determined. But you know what, Heather? You know, you do wonder what this means for our democracy.
The same week, this guy filmed himself at an event with Max Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, conservative. He filmed himself going up for a photograph with Bernier. So Max is standing there thinking this is a friendly guy coming up for a picture. And the guy goes up, gets the picture taken, and then smashes an egg on Max Bernier's head. So literally, physically assaults him, right? This didn't get turned into anything. This is like a very if it was mentioned at all, it got very little coverage. The media didn't use this as, here's another example of the outrageous behavior of people towards politicians. None of that happened. Nobody pointed at Justin Trudeau and said, this is, we can blame you, Justin, for your divisive rhetoric and demonizing and dehumanizing your political adversaries and conservatives. They're all racists and misogynists and Nazis, right? None of that happened. So it was just a glaring example of this kind of double standard in the media and among the partisan class in Canada. You know, but there is something tremendously Canadian about all of this, right? So you can have the political elites spending 2.5 years sowing division, calling citizens racists and misogynists and Nazis.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens?
These people, very often misogynistic, racist, women haters, science deniers, the fringe. Same prime minister 6 years later as he fans the flames of an unjustified national emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, when did the prime minister lose his way? When did it happen?
The right honourable prime minister.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag.
And literally the Prime Minister of the country openly expressing his belief that a certain class of Canadians don't deserve to have their rights defended.
I mean, when Aaron O'Toole talks about, oh yes, we need to unite people, we need to bring people together, he's talking about defending the rights of people who are anti-vax.
Right, so this is what the political class does. They call Canadians names, they separate them in terms of obedient Canadians and disobedient Canadians. They take away your civil liberties and your rights as they see fit for 2.5 years. If you complain about it, you're called a racist or a far right-wing extremist or a Nazi or something. This is what the people that we've lent power to feel entitled to do, and everybody just shrugs about it. Everybody shrugs it off. I guess that's what they're entitled to do. They're the ruling class after all. And then one guy, one Canadian citizen who apparently doesn't know how to conduct himself like a civilized adult in public, confronts a member of the ruling elite with the same degree of vulgarity and crudeness and viciousness that they've been directing towards Canadians for 2.5 years, but without any of the political power. And polite Canadian society loses its mind. How could this happen? And so, you know, of course, you have all of the usual suspects who are, you know, clutching their pearls and reaching for the smelling salts because this Canadian thought he had the right to speak this way to somebody from a party who has been calling him a Nazi and a racist and telling him he's not allowed to leave his country or to work or to gather with his family. Who does he think he is? Right? So you've got the media all acting like this is the most externally disturbing thing that's ever happened. And you've got the CBC, who aren't satisfied simply taking a partisan stand on these kinds of issues. They have to pile on other elements of their ideology on top of this as well. So here they are trying to turn this into having something to do with the fact that Freeland is a woman, that this is somehow some specific thing that has been aimed at women, which I don't understand. How do you explain what happened to Justin last year and to Max Bernier? Not women last time I checked. But anyway, this is what the CBC is saying. Chrystia Freeland, latest target of public threats, intimidation against women in Canadian politics. So, I mean, one of the things that jumps out at me right away is just the inconsistencies piling up on top of each other, right? So somehow we go from gender is just a construct, none of that's real, men can be in women's sports, there's no advantage going on there because of biology if the man identifies as a woman. To, oh my God, a big burly man said swear words to a lady. It just flips in the moment like that. And the other thing that strikes me too is that this is an example, and it's related, this is an example of how ideologues kind of perceive things. First of all, there's no logical consistency. There's no universal principles that they apply. Everything is just what needs to be said in the moment for my agenda to dominate. And if that contradicts what I said in the last moment for my agenda to dominate, it doesn't matter. And I don't think they notice that there's a contradiction, because I genuinely think that people who are doing this, they're just reacting to whatever's in front of them in the moment. And the other thing that is being demonstrated here is that rather than, this is particularly for people in the media, which is a huge problem, rather than looking out at the world and trying to analyze what's actually happening out there, they look out at the world and they look for opportunities to project their ideological convictions and conclusions onto the world. And then they claim that the events that they've just projected their conclusions on confirm their ideology. It's this circular reasoning thing. So in this situation, this has nothing to do with the fact that Freeland's a woman. It's nothing to do with it. Again, we've seen worse things happen to Justin Trudeau and Maxime Bernier. But there's no context for these people. It's all about what needs to be true in order for my preferred version of this to be right. And then they say that's what's happening. That's kind of the reasoning that they have. Anyway, and so it's just one example of numerous examples of the usual suspects in the media and the political establishment, and then the section of the Canadian population who cannot think outside of partisan ideological groupthink. They don't think for themselves. They simply have aligned themselves with a particular faction of the ruling class and a particular way to think. They have that deference towards state authority, and anybody who stands up in opposition to the state, whether it's at the trucker protests or something like this, are immediately in the wrong. And the political class are given the benefit of the doubt that they're right. And that if they're persecuting someone or attacking somebody, it's got to be justified because they're the ruling class, and they wouldn't do that if it wasn't justified. It's very, very strange, and again, it's horrifically Canadian.
Kiss the hand that slaps me senseless, and so accepting I am, so defenseless I am far too Canadian. I am far too Canadian.
This is going to get ugly.
Never okay.